Hello, my name is Robin C.M. Duncan. Welcome to the Glasgow 2024 Indie Author Reading Library. Today I'm reading an extract from Resurrection Men by David Craig. Prologue. The City of Glasgow, February 1893. It was long after dark when the circus came to the city. Gaudy caravans and travel-worn wagons journeyed through cobbled streets to the Glasgow Green, highlighted by gas streetlights. Circuses visiting Glasgow usually arrived in a parade of pomp and colourful eccentricity. This one slipped in like a thief in the night. Age and weather had faded the paintwork on the caravans, but birds, animals and flowers carved into the wooden frames signalled a Romany origin. George Ranach had expected their arrival, following them to the Glasgow Green. He watched as roustabouts and performers erected tents and set up stalls by lantern light. Most wore coats to ward off the late winter chill, but not all. Those like himself had no need. After 2 centuries of suffered insult and the company of traitors, he felt something unfamiliar, and took a moment to identify it. Kinship. Marco, Lucia, and Bresnik had spent those same years in rootless exile, bending the circus to their will, while waiting his summons, and had travelled Europe to answer it. 3 enemies had long awaited his revenge. 3 allies had come to help deliver it. He walked towards the circus. His trespass drew attention, and 2 heavy-set men left their work to intercept him. He took their measure and unveiled, taking pleasure in the surprise and fear that crossed their faces. They let him pass. A figure waited for him, silhouetted against the fire. George Ranach, Lucia greeted in rusty English. It has been a long time. Chapter 1. March. The fog hung thick and Stygian over Glasgow, smothered the streetlights. It wasn't a night for honest men, and it found Wilton Hunt swathed in darkness within the southern necropolis cemetery. He saw naught but fog-spawned wraiths and gravestone silhouettes, hearing only the steady rhythm of Tam Foley's digging. "Why do you, crunch, think Miller wants her?" Foley asked as he dug deeper into the grave. "Healthy 16-year-olds don't habitually drop dead." In truth, Hunt cared little why the medical professor wanted her or any other corpse they exhumed, and any lingering guilt he felt about their sepulchral desecrations was not enough to lose sleep over. Foley's opinion was that if the dead had any objections, they were free to raise them. It had been funny last night in the old toll bar over ale, less so now. Foley grunted. He was making good progress. Hunt having dug the first few feet. The grave was fresh, less than a day old. So long as he pays us. Thus far, Miller had been as good as his word, paying on delivery before ushering them back out into the night with an air of distaste. Accounting for the late hour, thick fog and cemetery wall, Hunt risked opening the lantern a little and held it over the gravestone. Amy Margaret Newfield, dearly beloved daughter and sister, born 29th August 1876, departed 12th March 1893. Thou art good, and goodness still delighteth to forgive. Found it, said Foley, iron-struck wood in hollow agreement. Hunt put down the lantern and lowered himself into the grave. They had widened it sufficiently to give a little standing room on either side of the coffin, making it easier to break open. Foley wrapped a vinegar-soaked cloth around his face and looked at him expectantly. Busy securing a cloth mask around his own face, a precaution in case of swift corruption, it took Hunt a moment to notice the attention. "What?" Foley cocked his head, his voice muffled through the mask. "Is your head up your arse? Pools? Damn!" He hauled himself back out the grave and collected 2 crowbars from the wheelbarrow before lowering himself carefully back down. The force of a heavy landing might save them time by breaking the coffin open, or it might warp the wood and nails, making their task harder. He handed 1 crowbar to Foley and jammed the other between the coffin and its lid, working the edge of the wood until he found a grip. Foley did the same at the other end, the coffin creaking beneath them. Hunt looked at Foley. Ready? There was always an unpleasant anticipation at what might lurk beneath the lid. Aye. They stepped back in unison and forced the crowbars forward. It was hard work, the sturdy coffin made of elm. Had the new fields been poorer, the coffin would have been cheap, flimsy pine. The lid yielded, bearing nails like fangs. Hunt peered into the coffin where the shadowed remains of Amy Newfield waited. Ready? He asked Foley, as they climbed out of the grave. Foley leaned over. Aye, are you? This isn't my first corpse. Hunt reminded him. He hadn't been sick since their 4th exhumation. This afternoon's shit wasn't my first, but it still smelled. Foley squatted. Hoist her up. You've the sweet words of a poet. Hunt put his revulsion aside and gripped the corpse's right arm. He lifted the body while Foley reached down and took hold of her left arm. They raised her together in defiance of weary limbs. Once she was upright, Hunt let go of the arm and took hold of their legs. He lifted, and her white funeral dress brushed against him in a soft silken sigh. Foley dragged the body up onto the grass while Hunt replaced the coffin lid. Wordlessly, Foley reached down for a glove-clad hand to help him up out of the grave. Both men yielded to fatigue and sank to the ground. There was a rustle of movement, and Foley clapped him on the shoulder. Let's move the body, fill in the grave, and get the hell out of here. Hunt forced himself to his feet, arms aching as they dragged the corpse several feet from her grave. He put the lantern down and studied the dead girl's pale face and lank, dark hair. Her eyes had opened during the exhumation and now stared up sightlessly. That was a first. The restless ones usually just farted. Shame, Foley said, as he moved the wheelbarrow next to the body. He pulled off his mask and shoved it into his pocket. Yes, said Hunt, following suit. The pair picked up their shovels and reburied the empty coffin. He wondered how many other graves in the cemetery had been likewise emptied over the years. A job well done, Foley huffed between breaths. He mopped his sweat-soaked brow with a sleeve, smearing dirt over his face. Well done indeed, except we forgot to strip the body. Shit, so we did. Foley stared down at the dirt. I'm not digging that up again. They habitually stripped the exhumed corpses and threw the clothing or burial shrouds back into the coffin before reburying it. No, we'll just have to take our chances. Under the law, a corpse was not property, and thus taking it was not legally theft. However, a corpse's clothing was considered property, enough to untie a sheriff's hands and let him drop the full weight of his displeasure on top of any body snatcher caught with so much as a burial shroud. Enacted in response to the infamous Edinburgh Westport murders, the Anatomy Act had ensured a steady supply of medical cadavers, ending the body-snatching epidemic from the early years of the century. The medical schools, however, did not have the luxury of picking and choosing their corpses, which is where we come in. They trudged to the wheelbarrow, Hunt lagging behind. Foley stopped. Where's the body? She slipped off to answer nature's call, Hunt answers as he adjusted his boot. On their third exhumation, Foley had rigged the corpse's arm to wave with a piece of string, causing Hunt to almost foul himself. He considered himself well prepared for future tricks. I'm not kidding. And I'm in no mood for this, Hunt said, but the edge in Foley's voice gave him pause. She's right there, where we... There was only crushed grass where the body had lain. The lantern still shone where he'd left it. They searched the area, but found neither corpse nor explanation for its absence. Keep looking, Foley said. We've just walked to the wrong bit. Hunt knew differently, the hairs on his neck rising. Let's get out of here. We can't leave without the body. It's gone. We should be gone too. A dread certainty told him they shouldn't linger. Let's give the good professor the bad news. Hunt turned off his gloves and dropped them into the wheelbarrow. Two bowler hats sat in the grass. He put his on and handed its shabby brother to Foley. Foley put his hat on, muttering under his breath. He dropped the shovels and crowbars into the wheelbarrow and headed off. Hunt took one last look around and followed after. He gripped his lantern, its bobbing light cutting through the fog. Foley was somewhere ahead, his tools rattling inside the wheelbarrow with an urgent tempo. He didn't bother waiting for Hunt to light the way. He'd trip if he wasn't careful. Hunt's foot caught in a branch or toppled gravestone and he fell. Light died as the lantern struck the ground and shadows closed in around him. He sprawled face down, mired in inky darkness, as the rattling faded in the distance. He was alone. His clothing was damp with sweat, and a clammy chill left him shivering. He lay still, hardly daring to breathe, as instinct shrieked at him to move. A memory of the exhumed girl's cold, pale face came to mind. She was out there somewhere. He listened, but he heard naught save his own ragged breaths and the thump, thump, thump of his pounding heart. Nothing else. No one else. Alone. Am I? His mind played through a macabre logic. The corpse had gone, but she hadn't vanished. Maybe she still lurked in the cemetery, cold death stalking him through a forest of gravestones. He could hear something now, a rustle of grass, clothing brushing against cloth. Closer, closer. His eyes were shut, his limbs tensed, breath held tightly. Something was close. Closer. Above him, reaching down, a cold hand gripped his right wrist. God help me! Air exploded out of his lungs in a wordless scream. His legs bucked against the ground and he jerked his right arm back in a bid to break free. What are you playing at? He opened his eyes to see Foley backing off a step. Fuck! He gasped, almost limp with relief. I thought what? Nothing. He got to his feet, trembling. Let's get out of here. Foley led them through the fog to where he left the wheelbarrow. They reached the gatehouse and egressed onto Caledonia Road, where Foley's wagon waited under a gaslight. Red-faced from the night's work, and his dark moustache thick with sweat, Foley relocked the padlock, securing the gates. He bought the key from a corrupt town council official. Hunt considered his friend. There were times when he regretted defying his parents, but less often since meeting Foley. Almost 5 years, Hunt Sr., Foley had joined the army as an officer at the age of 16, serving in India and Africa, where he'd attained the rank of lieutenant. His older brother died of consumption when Foley was 22, leaving him the sole heir. He bowed to familial pressure and resigned his commission to follow in the family's pharmaceutical trade. Influenza had taken both his parents 2 years ago, leaving him the owner of both the Foley pharmacy and the tenement flat above. Foley never spoke openly of it, but Hunt suspected that he found little satisfaction in his late brother's trade, seeking it instead at the bottom of a bottle. If Hunt surrendered his interest in the natural sciences and took a role in his family's shipping company, he wondered if he too would turn to drink. Not that temperance counts amongst my present virtues. Foley's horse, Wilfred, whinnied as they loaded the wheelbarrow onto the back of the wagon and prepared to leave. Chapter 2. Foley's wagon rolled along Glasgow's deserted streets and left the Gorbals behind as it travelled north. The Victoria Bridge took them across the River Clyde and into the fog-shrouded heart of the city. Foley guided the wagon into the prosperous West End and onwards to the Glasgow University's medical school on Gilmer Hill. It was only 20 years since the university had relocated here from its original site on High Street. They passed through its gates and halted in the courtyard. The senior professor's residence was attached to the college building, a circumstance of convenience for its present incumbent, Angus Miller. Hunt walked alongside Foley to the front door, all too aware the professor expected a body. He knocked on the door and waited, wondering at the circumstances that had conspired to land him in such a situation. Had it not been for his parental estrangement, he would not now be lodging in Foley's spare room stealing corpses for money. The sound of a bolt being pulled back snapped him from his reverie. The door swung open and Miller's grey-haired housekeeper greeted them. She looked tired and resentful at the hour of the imposition. Hunt removed his hat and smiled. "Good evening, ma'am. Professor Miller is expecting us." Her silence spoke volumes as she allowed them in and led them to Miller's study. "These young gentlemen are here to see you, sir," she sniffed. The professor waited inside for them, a fringe of grey hair hanging from the back and sides of an otherwise bald head. He wore a black frock coat, one that barely contained his stout figure. Miller stood up from behind his desk. Yes, Mrs. Abbott, that will be all." He watched her leave. "Thank you and good night." Hunt and Foley echoed Miller's sentiment, their courtesy earning them a tight-lipped glare as she shut the door behind her. Miller's right hand rested on the college keys. "One of you should have stayed with the wagon. I'll unlock the mortuary and you two can carry the body in." "Professor," Hunt said, "we encountered a problem." "How am I going to explain this?" Miller pulled off his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. "What manner of problem? You dig up the body, and then you bring it here. How can there be a problem?" "The how escapes us at present, Professor," Hunt admitted. "We exhumed Miss Newfield without incident, but the body disappeared while we were filling in the grave." "Disappeared? What do you mean, disappeared?" Miller's eyes darted between the pair. "We mean disappeared," was Foley's unhelpful contribution, "as in, we couldn't bloody find her. Aye, we looked." "She was dead." Miller paced up and down behind his desk, wringing his hands. "Dead and buried. And you two cretins managed to lose her." Hunt and Foley sat uninvited on the two chairs in front of the desk. Miller eyed them. "Maybe you sold the cadaver to someone else, someone willing to pay more." "There is no one else, Professor," Hunt said. The pair had looked discreetly for other medical professors willing to pay for supplementary corpses, but their circumspect inquiries yielded nothing, and they decided not to press their luck. "This is a risky enough business without us selling each other out," Foley said. Miller slumped down into his chair and put his spectacles back on. "Maybe she was buried alive, wrongly diagnosed as dead by some quack trained at a lesser institution, perhaps." "She seemed dead to me," Foley said. "Clearly not dead enough," Miller snapped, "or she'd be on your wagon and not off God knows where." I hope you enjoyed that reading of the opening sections of David Craig's Resurrection Men. Please look on the Glasgow 2024 YouTube channel for more readings in the Indie Author Reading Library, and also all previous Glasgow 2024 Presents panels and discussions are on there as well. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.